Hey, everybody. All right. So we're the security panel, and this is going to be fun because we have 15 minutes. So this is going to be the fastest, most exciting security panel in the history of ETH Denver. I am Zack, Seward, and I'm going to quickly introduce you to our wonderful panel, and I'm going to try to typecast them a little bit just so you guys get a feel for the broad base of security expertise that we have up here. Because security panels are super fun, because everybody can use some security tips and tricks. If you're a project founder, if you're a smart contract developer, if you're just an average Joe. So that's why this is gonna be fun. Let's do the intros. All right, far side, we got Andy from Forta. He is our on-chain monitor. He sees all. Next to him is Robert. He's from Ottersec. He is our smart contract auditor. Next to him is Bruno. Bruno is from Magna. That's our OPSEC Pro right there. Next up in the cowboy hat is John from Aztec. He's the privacy person. And last, but certainly not least, is Brooke from Evolved Threat. She is the blockchain threat intelligence expert. All right, that's it. So we're going to start this off with a little bit of context. It was a big year for crypto crime, according to Chainalysis. Something like 20 billion in criminal transactions were monitored on chain. And the standout star of that data was the North Korean hackers, which brought home a whopping $1.6 billion in hacked crypto through a variety of means. Bridge hacks, all sorts of other stuff. We actually have some folks on the stage who have some personal experience with North Korean hackers, so we start there. John, you actually wrote a piece about this fairly recently. What's your takeaway for why the North Korean hackers had such a great year last year?
Yeah, so we have a personal anecdote. We're a privacy project, and we're very focused on protecting consumer privacy, not the privacy of criminals. But we actually had a run-in with a North Korean hacker who tried to apply to our company, and it was only through paranoia that we didn't hire them. They famously signed off their cover letter with "the world will see a great result from my hand," which was sufficiently villainous for us to kind of raise some red flags during the interview. But to be honest, you know, in a space that's very desperate for technical talent, we're very vulnerable to hiring folks who might pose a vulnerability to our coding supply chains. And once someone gets access, and we'll talk about some of these vulnerabilities in a little bit, you know, who knows whether they can get access to your private keys if they have privileged access. And I think Bruno actually has a story on this.
I think our North Korean hacker is a little more sophisticated. They, cast our coding screen at decent English, but we were a little suspicious, so they were remote, and we ended up hiring them, but we completely walled them off. We had them in a separate repo. They didn't have access to any of our internal tools. They were working with us for a little while. We got suspicious when we realized it wasn't one person, it was multiple people that with their camera off. But the point being, I don't know how these crypto projects employ anons, or if they do, I would hope that they're being as secure about walling them off, because you don't know who they are, you have no recourse, no court of law you're going to go after them on, of what do they have access to, what code can they push, what code can they read, and what else they might be able to do internally.
I guess the question is there ever too much paranoia when it comes to being a crypto professional? Brooke, I'm going to toss this to you.
I think it's just really important to remember that there's so much out there, and if you're not vigilant and always watching what's happening in your own sphere, paranoia is such a good thing. It keeps us safe. It's the fight or flight. I think we women have this great thing called intuition, so it comes a little easier for us. But being paranoid is the only way that you're going to be able to keep yourself safe.
All right, let's go to the fresh alpha section of this conversation. Robert, I'm going to throw this to you. When it comes to emerging trends in terms of exploit types, what are we seeing? What is the latest in how people are breaking these systems?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, we work with a lot of protocols like Magna and Forta here. I think one thing that we realized is there's a lot more really determined attackers who are well capitalized, who are willing to potentially push the boundaries in terms of what is economically feasible in order to exploit things, right? So the most obvious example I can bring up is a couple months ago in November, Mango markets lost around $100 million due to some sort of economic exploitation. After we saw that, we actually saw the same sort of attack being mirrored across many other chains that we work with. So it seems like after this initial example, people tried to start copying them, and they saw this new attack surface that came up, and mirrored what Avi did.
Andy, I'm going to get you on the board here. What are you seeing when you look at the data? Like, what are emerging trends in terms of the exploits that you come across on a daily basis?
So Forta looks only at on-chain activity. So we're looking at exploits, we're looking at phishing attacks, rug pulls, other scams, and I guess hackers are sort of changing their approaches all the time, especially as the space is getting more sophisticated. They get more sophisticated to avoid detection. So it's just sort of it's a constant cat and mouse game that never ends. But there was Coinbase actually wrote a great piece recently on something called address poisoning, which is something we're seeing a lot about, where a hacker will send you a $0 transaction to your wallet, and the address they're sending it from has beginning characters and end characters that look similar to other addresses you've sent crypto to or received crypto from. So if you're really quickly, fingering in an address or copying and pasting something in, perhaps, you may inadvertently send it to a malicious address that you do have history with, but it's the hacker trying to essentially sort of spoof a legitimate address, and it's a really widespread scheme. And I'm sure most people don't fall prey to this, but it's also something that's really easy to sort of implement. So we see a lot of that.
Got it. That was called account poisoning?
Address poisoning.
Address poisoning. That was a good one. I guess the question there is, does anyone have strong feelings as to whether or not, wallet providers should be being, more vigilant about this stuff? Is this sort of is this just it's your fault that you got screwed?
Your fault.
Okay, so, unpack the it's your fault, the personal responsibility narrative. What do you think?
That's what self-custody is. That's what we're here for. If you can't learn and know what you're doing and using the products that are there for you, then you really need to go back to the drawing board. But the biggest threat to your security is yourself. So whatever tool you're using, it's not their fault. You have to utilize the tool correctly. It's like driving a car. If you don't know how to drive the car, you're going to get in an accident.
Yeah, I mean, that's something even we train our team on in terms of security, is just think, use your brain. If someone is pinging you and saying, hey, I need 2 ETH, something we were talking about backstage, so many of us are telegraphing our every move on Twitter, right? If you're out there, you're looking at my Twitter, you know exactly what panel I'm on or who I'm on it with, what event we're co-sponsoring. It'd be easy to send an email to my chief of staff and be like, hey, Anchorage needs 2 ETH for the food and beverage tomorrow. Can you send it to this address? And there's a good chance you'll look at it and think, oh, I should send this. First, hey, think, text me, call me, and confirm. Because in a world where everyone knows everything, spear phishing, which is targeted phishing, is so easy to carry out.
Gotcha. Robert, I'm going to take this one to you. So similar to sort of this emerging trends thing, what are some of the things that you think are most overlooked? Whether you're a smart contract developer or just someone who holds crypto, what are some of these common mistakes that you keep encountering?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think we spend a lot of time reading code, but oftentimes, people are the weakest link. And I think, when it comes to protocol operational security, there's a lot of improvements that can be made. As an example, we work with a lot of blockchains, and oftentimes there's, 1 or 2 people who have critical access to the code base, who can essentially push whatever they want into the main validator code, right? And if you have access to push, whatever changes you want, you could potentially convince the validator network to send yourself, give yourself infinite funds or violate consensus. So one thing that we look really closely at is how many people does it take to break the network? Is there one person with too much power, who has direct access to push straight to master, and who can push potentially malicious versions, even whether that is intentional or maybe their computer got compromised? I think overall trying to limit that attack surface is really important. More on the operational side.
Did you want to chime in on the operational side?
I mean, do we have time?
We do. We have
You're
time.
going so fast. I'm so proud of us.
We have 5 minutes and 39 seconds.
Okay, here we go. So I think that what's being overlooked so much is the social engineering part of this. And yes, you as the consumer need to understand social engineering and when you're being socially engineered and not hacked. But these projects and these companies that come in, I feel like it's being overlooked, the educational piece of it. You have to make sure that your customers, your buyers, know who you are and that you're the only one they should be buying from. And anything else that comes around, like, you just have to be vigilant on that. If you're going to be providing a service or a product that is asking for money, like, you have to know that these people are maybe like novices, so they need to understand who you are and be really sure that they don't get, somebody else trying to get their money, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. All right, let's zoom out a little bit. I think often in the realm of hacks and exploits, you kind of hear that this is like battle testing the industry, right? We're strengthening the collective whole of crypto every time there's a major fuck up. John, do you think that people are learning these lessons, or do you think that it's sort of like you kind of have to have it happen to yourself before you recognize the behaviors that need changing?
Yeah, I kind of strongly disagree with that view, mainly because the attack surface area in crypto is always changing. It happens to be that our current paradigm is inside the EVM, but there are all these new blockchains and ZKs being developed right now. And we need fundamental tools to help us navigate a very complex space. And so working for a privacy project, Aztec, one of the things we believe is private identifiers might help. So a private identifier, let's say you are interviewing an anon, one of the really hard things is if you ask them, are you a North Korean, they can just lie to your face. And we don't actually have a much better system to confirm identity than just asking them the question. They can possibly, in the near future, furnish a ZK identifier that says definitively, I've gone through a third-party verification process. So we still deserve all these tools. We shouldn't kneecap ourselves by saying, all of this economic lossage is good for us, because to be frank, it's not.
I mean, yeah, we can't have that attitude of like, we can learn the hard way. Like, we can't afford it. At Magna, we managed, these projects' tokens because we distribute them, and we've had $500 million of tokens on a platform. We can't have one hack or we're done as a company. And so when we think about lessons we've learned from crypto, we also got to think about what are lessons we need to relearn from Web 2. And so we are paranoid about not only what messaging apps do we use, what productivity apps do we use, but also what customer data lives on every single SaaS app that every single person at our company uses, such that we actually went through the whole SOC 2 process, not because we needed it to win deals, but because I wanted the comfort of knowing that we had a thorough checklist and that everything we used within our company, we had clear, insight into who had access to it and what they could see.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys brought that up. I mean, I think it does sort of, all these hacks add to this growing lack of confidence in this industry, right? And it keeps scaring people off because these things keep happening with large sums of money. Andy, I want to put this to you. I think the thing that you mentioned, John, about sort of these additional layers of complexity, whether they're roll-ups or some of these, cross-chain bridging or any other of these new emerging interoperability tools, what does that level of complexity mean in terms of the type of exploits that you're seeing unfold on chain?
I think John described it well by saying the surface area is always expanding. It expands as fast as the pace of innovation. I think the other challenge that exists particularly in DeFi, is that there's kind of this culture of hands off once something goes live. Some of that's to avoid regulatory pressure. It's also just sort of an embedded part of the culture now too, right? Which is why so much emphasis is placed on getting the code right before it goes live. So a lot of security budgets are dedicated to audits and formal verification and things like that, but very little budget is dedicated to security post-launch. And I think one thing I would just like to underscore for everyone listening is that, even if you're building a Web3 product, you still have a lot of Web 2 components. So you still have front ends, you still have APIs, you still have, private key management's not a crypto sort of native thing, right? And if you look at a lot of hacks, a lot of them start with Web 2 components, right? It's not your oracles and your smart contracts and your governance. It's all the stuff that's been around for decades, right?
Robert, I'm going to put the auditor on the spot with this one. I mean, do audits guarantee success for these projects? I mean, do people misinterpret these things as a silver bullet for future shenanigans?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not. I think, to be clear, I do not think audits are 100% guaranteed. I think the point of an audit is to raise the water level of security for your project, right? I mean, realistically, most hacks that we've seen, I think, are relatively, are not very complex in terms of the actual exploit being performed. I think when projects, when attackers look at projects, they try to find the easiest one to hack. And the point of an audit really is to make your project less appealing to a hacker. I think it's very unlikely that over the course of a 2 to 3 week engagement, a team of 2 or 3 people can find every single bug in your code, right? And anyone promising that, I think, is definitely overpromising.
And the other thing we talked about was security culture, and I think AuditSec is one of the best auditors, but it's garbage in, garbage out, no matter how good they are. If a project comes to them and the code is shit and they haven't prepared and it's not documented, they can only do so much.
All right, rapid fire to close this out. This is the security panel, so it's news you can use. What's the one sentence thing that you would implore people in the room to do to increase sort of their security awareness? Andy, I'm going to start down there, and we're going to finish over here. What's the quick thing that you tell people?
I think just being aware of what you're doing, which sometimes can mean slowing down a little bit.
Okay. Slow down, be aware.
Yep.
Robert.
Yeah, I mean, kind of echoing what he said, spend more time testing. I think the products that test more tend to have less bugs, tend to be more secure.
Test, test, test.
Super cliche, if you see something, say something. We had someone on our team the other day who was like, hey, this customer doc, does our overseas engineer need access to it? No. Be paranoid.
Be paranoid.
I would say add to the social consensus layer. See something, say something. When I published my North Korean thread, many dozens of people came out with their own stories, and some of these things, they're just not in the common consciousness.
Disclose.
You weren't hacked, you were socially engineered.
And to add to what he said, insanity check. If you feel like, hey, this is a North Korean, then you might be like, yeah, like, what do you do?
You weren't hacked, you were socially engineered.
Yeah, you were fooled.
Tough love.
You weren't hacked.
All right, well, that's the end of this panel. Thanks for being here, everybody. I'm Zach.
So fast.
Join me in thanking all these wonderful people. That was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Stay paranoid.